Good evening, everyone. We are back with Isaiah chapter 8. We've completed chapter 7, and I indicated to you that chapter 7 really flows into chapter 8. And this is important for us to realize that they are all interconnected, in fact, all the way to chapter 9. In chapter 8 itself, this is a conversation that God is speaking to me, and the me would be Isaiah. And hence, we need now to take a look at a couple of things in terms of its background. And let me just show you where we are with the background. We have Ahaz, and he reigned for 16 years. And then we have Hezekiah, much longer, 14, 15, 29 years. Hezekiah. And hence, we are now looking at a period where it covers two kings. So yesterday, when we were reading chapter 7, it was somewhere here. And then when Hezekiah comes in, there were two other instances, 1 and 2, in the 6th year and in the 9th year. And here would be Ahaz in his 4th year, further back, in the 39th year of Uzziah. In the 39th year of Uzziah. So what I'm trying to show you is something that we need to bear at the back of our minds of what happened with the Assyrians coming to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is now beset by what we call the Assyrian conquest. So we have the Assyrians, and they came at the 39th year of Uzziah. And then we were reading yesterday with regards to Pekah and Redzin, that would be around the 4th year. And then at the 6th year of Hezekiah, they came again, different kings, all different kings. And finally, in the 9th year of Hezekiah, the final conquest of the northern kingdom, all completed itself. But one last one that you have to bear in mind, which we're not involved with right now, which would be somewhere around here, that would be the 14th year. And just remember, the 14th year of Hezekiah is very important. And that is the year when the Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, decided to want to take on the city of Jerusalem. And many things happened, and that was the turning point for Hezekiah, and he also had his life lengthened. So bear in mind, yesterday in Isaiah 7, we were talking about Redzin and Pekah. So let's begin. In chapter 8, as God said to Isaiah, he says, take a large scroll. Now, this word scroll here actually is, it actually means a tablet. And in the tablet, at least it's a writing tablet, right? It's not our Samsung tablet or anything like that. They had large pieces of stones, and they write. And in this case, when you talk about write, it would be, it could be a chisel, right? Engrave. Now, I'm not sure whether they had scrolls, but a tablet can also be a scroll. In this case, the word for tablet is Gilayon. Gilayon. Gilayon also have a concept of being, how should we say, a roll, right? So if it's in a roll, it will be a scroll, and then it will be right. If it's a tablet, then it would be engraved. And this way, with a man's pen, well, you could say that this would be a stylus. It could be a stylus to write, or it could be an engraving tool. So really depends on how we understand the word scroll or tablet. So if one is a piece of papyrus or a skin roll, then it would be an ink type of pen for writing. But the important thing is, God is telling him to write about something. The idea here is Maher Shalal Hash Bats. It's actually a meaning. It would be to hasten loot, and then to speed the spoils. They are in Hebrew, and I think this is the right place for us to pay attention that right now this is not written as a name. This is written as 4 words, literally 4 Hebrew words. But the 4 Hebrew words literally mean to hasten the looting, to speed up the spoils, which indicates how when a victor conquers and vanquishes a territory, they will take loot or take spoil. And this is what God has asked Isaiah to write, that God will hasten this. And I will take for myself faithful witness to record Uriah and Zechariah. Uriah is the high priest. Zechariah is a prophet. And so we read about him as well in Isaiah chapter 32 and 33. But more importantly is in the Hebrew context, in order to have a witness, you remember you need to have 2 or 3, right? 2 or 3 witnesses under the Torah. And so Uriah and Zechariah would be the witnesses. What are they witnessing? They're witnessing what Isaiah is about to write. However, in verse 3, another episode happens then, and then. I went to the prophetess. Now, very interestingly, I need you to understand that in the Hebrew language, we have a concept called euphemism. Let me just write this down. Euphemism. Euphemism is trying to use some light-hearted words to represent something more crude, something that people don't normally like to talk about as Orientals. And so this idea of went to, karav would actually mean to come near, to approach, but it actually means to enter into. And so this is a euphemism to have an intimate relations with the wife. And the wife is called a prophetess. Usually the Bible never refers to anyone who does not prophesy to be a prophet or a woman prophet. But it appears to us that the wife of Isaiah is also a prophet. So this is actually a prophet in the female gender. And Isaiah is said to have sex with his wife, the prophetess. And then she conceived, and then she bore a son. And so this would be the second son. And then the Lord said to me, call his name Maher Shalal Hashbaz. And that was exactly what was written in the scroll. And again, I want to point out to you that this is a complex name. It is not unusual. It's just that we see it unusual. But it appears that there will be times when a name is not just one word. A name may be multiple words. And in this case, 4 words. The word here, and he shall call the name Mahashalal Hashbaz, is that this is one name. And it's a complex name. It's a complex name. For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Assyria. Now, again, I want to highlight to you that we have a corresponding verse yesterday that speaks about this. And this would be in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 15. Right? 16. Before the child can choose good and reject evil, then the dreaded land will be forsaken by the 2 kings. Remember, and this would be, as I remind you, would be in Isaiah chapter 7, verses 14 to 16. And that was the sign that God wanted to give to Ahaz. And now we come to a point where there's a fulfillment that the woman, the young woman, the Alma, she conceived and bore a son. And we would know that the woman would call the boy's name Emmanuel. And Isaiah said to, the Lord said to Isaiah to call his name Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So he does have 2 names in that sense. And that before he actually have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, we saw yesterday in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 16, would be the time where curd and honey he shall eat. But before he has the ability to accept or choose good and reject evil, then this will happen. So now we have a parallel that before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother. And so this indication to us is this, and those of you who are parents would realize that this is not very long after the child is born. And it appears to be within the year of the child being born. Many of you may know that the child would either walk first or speak first. And in this case, even if the child walked first, we would be talking about 12 to 16 months. And that would be the time when Damascus would be destroyed, Samaria would be conquered, not conquered, but would be taken up and taken into exile. Taken away is exile by the king of Assyria. And so let's continue. Inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloah that flow softly, and rejoice in Redzin and Remaliah's son. Now, these people would be the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom refused to have gentle, softly flowing rebuke and exhortation. By the way, Shiloah is also another name is let's see. The other name would be Gihon. And those of you who've been to Israel, you know the place called Gihon Spring. And when we are walking in the Hezekiah's tunnel, where the Gihon is flowing into the city of Jerusalem, if you're not aware, the manner that the Gihon flows is the same the whole year round. It is gentle, it flows softly, and it provides the city with a good amount of water. And so this is an imagery that these people actually reject the discipline of God in the way where the waters of Shiloah or Gihon, that is flowing softly. And they prefer to rejoice, to have joy. And this would be exaltation, to celebrate, to have joy in Redzin of Damascus and in Remaliah's son, that is Pekah. And you know this is corresponding to Isaiah chapter 7, where we're talking about the fear and trembling of Ahaz at that point in time, because he knows that he will definitely lose this if they were to attack. And therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria, all his glory. He will go up over all his channels and go up over all his banks. Now, what does this mean? This would be river, strong and mighty, the Euphrates. The king of Assyria and all his glory is going to come down. And in verse 7, it means that the waters will ascend over all the streams. And you know, sometimes streams are quite fast flowing as well. And then they would walk upon. What does walk upon mean? Walk upon means it will flood on the banks. Now, this would be a contrast, right? An A and an A prime. This is a contrast. So God is saying, I am now chastising you in a very gentle way, and yet you disregard me. You prefer Redzin and Pekah. But now I am going to bring up over you the Euphrates River, strong and mighty, and it will flood all over, right? It will flood all over. Now, it is interesting that when the Bible talks about flood, it is actually a picture of how the ancient armies would actually come upon a land. It's like water flowing so much, maybe like a tsunami, that it would gush over and it's like a flood. And it would take over the northern kingdom, and then it will flow down to the southern kingdom after it has demolished Syria. And so that is the whole picture that God is giving us up to this point. And now let's carry on. In chapter 8, verse 8, he says, he will pass through Judah. He will overflow and pass over and reach to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings will fill the breath. This verse 8 is very interesting, that it will be full to the breadth of your land. Be full. Now, again, as I had mentioned to you, the flood, and this is the picture of the flood, go over all its banks and go, and this is to walk over. And this is a picture of how Israel and Judah will be flooded by Assyria. So this is a picture. It will come all the way to Judah. Not only that it is overflowing and that it will flow over and pass over, it will come to the neck, but it will not drown Judah. So notice this. It will not drown Judah, but it will flood the whole of Israel. And this is the time where it will go even further. So now understand this. When it comes to this point in time, it is no longer Ahaz. So need to be very clear about this. Ahaz is a time where Pekah and Redzin are just removed, and that the northern kingdom is partially exiled. But when it comes to Hezekiah, it will be when Assyria would be at his neck, almost to cover his head. And that would arrive at the 14th year of King Hezekiah, praying to God to save. And what is going to happen is that when you see the imagery of the Assyrians first flowing over Israel, taking over Israel, and that would be in the 6th year of Hezekiah. By the time the 9th year came, the northern kingdom was completely taken away into exile. In the 14th year, Sennacherib would just chew up the rest of Judah, but not Jerusalem. And so we will talk about Jerusalem as when it comes to a point where literally Hezekiah is about to give up. And this is important for us to realize that this entire prophecy has gone past Ahaz to hit Hezekiah. And then he says, "Oh, Emmanuel." Actually, this literally means that it will fill the breadth of your land, and God is with us. Now, this phrase, Emmanuel or Emmanuel, there's actually two words. Emmanuel, there are two words. Basically, Emmanuel is also a phrase. It's not a name, it's a phrase that God is with us. That when all these things happen, when the Assyrians flood Judah, and it will reach to the neck, and stretching out of his wings will fill the land of Judah. Your land will be Judah. God will show himself that God is with us. Now, this is a very important passage to understand. The reason being is that when we come to this stage, you need to go back and read 2 Kings chapter 19, right? That will give us a very good picture of what is going to happen with Emmanuel when God is with us. And there was a miracle defeat of the Assyrians. And so that gives us a picture of how the progress of the prophecy would be. Verse 9. Be shattered, O you peoples, be broken in pieces. Give ear, all you from far countries. Gird yourself, but be broken in pieces. Gird yourself, but be broken in pieces. Now, each time you see words repeated, A and B, and in this case, virtually identical, it's an emphasis that you will still be destroyed. Now, all this is important because this is trying to tell us that the Assyrian Empire actually was not only looking to conquer Israel and Judah, but they were conquering everything and everywhere. And that is why it says, when you gird yourself, when you prepare yourselves to be fighting, you will still be broken in pieces. You will still be destroyed. So take counsel together. They will gang up. They will see what they can do. But it will come to nothing. They will not be able to withstand. Right? Speak the word, but it will not stand. That's an A and a B. Right? It will come to nothing. It will not stand. It doesn't matter what they think they want to do. One of the things that we may not be aware of is that the Assyrian kingdom is extremely strong at this point in time. They were building up at the early years of King Uzziah. And then towards the later part of the King Uzziah, towards the end part, they reared their head and they started to take on nation by nation. And in this prophecy, it is with regards to the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom, that it doesn't matter what you say, the northern kingdom will be exiled completely in, I think, 3 stages. And the southern kingdom will first be confronted by Sennacherib, and then Sennacherib is defeated this way, by God. For God is with us. And this shows that God defeats the Assyrians to protect David's throne. And this is under Hezekiah. Hezekiah's name means the strength of God. And so Hezekiah himself, although he has the name strength of God, Hezekiah, he doesn't have literally that strength. But God was with him and God was with Judah. And God defeats the Assyrians. Yeshayahu, that would be Isaiah. The Lord saves, delivers, right? But these are theophoric names, meaning there are many people in the Bible that has the word God in his name, but it doesn't mean that they are God, right? Eliah, that we've got God's name there, right? Hezekiah has God's name in there. Yeshayahu has God's name in there. It doesn't mean that they are God. When we are given a name, especially Orientals, it doesn't apply to Westerners, especially Orientals, in the good old days of the ancient China, they are poor in their livelihood. And so when they have a field and they have a pig or a cow, they would name their children after the pig or the cow. Now, today we would see that it's really derogatory. But in those days, it is to actually put hope in the child that they would be prosperous. Because the symbol of a pig and an ox is really a symbol of wealth. And so in the Hebrew culture, when a person is having the name of God in his name, there is an anticipation of an event, or an anticipation of the character, an anticipation of something that God will do during his time on earth. And God is with us, Emmanuel, would actually define a time when God appears and fights for Judah, when Judah is up to her neck. And it is to protect David's throne. Now, from verse 11, for God thus spoke to me, that's Isaiah, with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk the way of this people. Now, this would be a time where this people was following Shebna. So you could check on Shebna, and this would be in Isaiah 22:15. And then there are other passages that is in 2 Kings. And Shebna lived at the time of Hezekiah, and they all plotted against Hezekiah. They did not want Hezekiah to be king, even though he was a good king and respected God and did the right things. The people wanted the northern king. They wanted other kings because they thought that Hezekiah was a weak king. And so God says, don't walk in their way. Follow what Hezekiah says. Do not say a conspiracy or alliance. Okay? Concerning all that this people call a conspiracy. That is when Shebna is doing all these conspiracies, that saying that Hezekiah is no good, and so on and so forth. So do not be afraid. Do not fear of their threats or be troubled. The idea is tremble is the word to be caused to be afraid until trembling. Their threats in this case is the idea of to be afraid of their threats. Threats meaning to threaten you, to cause fear, to put fear in you. And do not be afraid to be troubled or to be afraid of trembling. This would be another A and B. It's the same thing. Don't be afraid of these people. They are more than you, right? They are more than you. They are an alliance to conspire against Hezekiah. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Verse 13, him you shall hallow. You shall make holy or special, right? That you treat him different. Let him be your fear. Fear God. Let him be your dread. When you are trembling, let it be of God, not of these people. That is the important part of this lesson. To tell Isaiah, even though when your eyes show you that the king is good, but the people are no good, the intent is to show us that democracy really isn't a good thing. Theocracy is the model that God gave us. So fear God and not the people. Him will be as a sanctuary. Now, the sanctuary, Mikdash, or a place where you can seek asylum, right? but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Let's look at this. God will be an asylum, a safe haven, but a stone of stumbling. Verse 14 means this, a stone plate, a stone plate. That's what it means, a stone of strike or plate. Why does it say that? Because God is saying that God himself will be a sanctuary to those who fear him, to those who tremble in him, and that's telling Isaiah. But he will become a stone that will strike at them. This is what they call a stone of plague, a stone of stumbling, a stone where God will take to strike at them. The next word here is a rock of offense. The rock of offense. Rock and stone, we have similar words, right? Stumbling block. This would be an occasion to stumble, to fall. And so we get this whole idea of an A and a B talking about the same thing. A stone of stumbling is very much a rock of offense. Two similar ideas using different words, but the idea is that they will be caused to be hurt and they will be caused to fall. And this is to both the houses of Israel. What is both houses? Israel, north, Judah, south. Now you remember, just now we read that the flood would come. It will overflow the banks. It will walk on the banks. It will flow through the land of Israel, and it will come into Judah to the breadth to fill it, and it will be to the neck of Judah. And so God is allowing this to happen to teach them a lesson. And so God is saying, with this aspect of the prophecy, he is going to be the cause to strike at them, to teach them a lesson very much. As a trap, the word trap, this is a bird trap. And a snare here would be a lure or a bait. Could be fishing, could be animals, could be a hook, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, this is important because if you go back and read 2 Kings chapter 19 onwards, you will find that the Assyrians is really not a force to be trifled with. And when you are in a state where you are put in a siege, when you are totally surrounded by the Assyrians, it literally tells you that your days are numbered. And that is the kind of emotion that verse 13 and 14 comes. You may be afraid of the Syrians. God says, let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. Verse 15, and many among them shall stumble. Not everyone, as you can see. Even though this is a stone of stumbling, they shall fall and be broken, be snared and taken. And all of this is to show you that A, B, and C, that they will be defeated. That it will be Israel and it will be Judah. Israel eventually will be complete. Judah will be up to the neck. Now, in English, we would say that the Assyrians was up to their eyeballs. But in Hebrew, they don't have that phrase. So the phrase is, the danger is up to their neck. So what are they supposed to do? You see that, how God teaches them is to give them warnings, exhort them, and discipline them. And then he comes back and shows them how to come back to him. How to come back to him. And that's really interesting. So in verse 16, it says, bind up the testimony. That is the attestation. That is the testimony. How else you could? This would be something that can be repeated, right? Something repeated. And that would be instructions. That's why it's repeated instructions. Then seal the law among my disciples. Bind up and seal testimony and law. Law is Torah. And so you find that testimony and law are similar, right? And this, again, you can now see it's an A and a B, is to tell them, focus on the testimony of God. That you need to recall. Focus on the instructions of God. Now, this word disciple is a very interesting term. And I need to spend just a minute here. The word disciple is limud. Limud. It comes from the word lamad. Lamad means to teach, to goad. When we are teaching an ox to walk straight and plowing, whenever the ox moves out of line, you would take a stick and knock it back into its line. And that is lamad. It's using what we call the old way of using the rod in a way of teaching. And so the intensive form of lamad is would be in a PL form. And so we find that lamad is about learning. And then in the intensive form, after you've learned, you teach. You teach the way you learn. And the people who are learning are called limud. And so and the Hebrew word is very interesting. The one who is instructed, it all comes from the same root word, lamad. And so disciples in the Hebrew idea is one who is literally learning and then teaching. So the person who is learning is called a limud, a disciple. And so God says this, look at my testimony and look at the Torah. Among my disciples, there are people there still learning from me. Learn from them. And I will wait on the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob. I will hope in him. And that's the attitude that Isaiah has. Here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. That's Isaiah. The children, the two sons, whom the Lord has given me. We read of his first son in chapter 7, verse 3. And now we read of his second son. That would be in chapter 8, verse 3. And that's where we are with Isaiah. And so Isaiah says, I and the children that God has given, they are for signs and wonders in Israel. What does that mean? Sign, sign would be an ot, like God gave a sign to Ahaz in the previous chapter, chapter 17, chapter 7, verse 13, 14, 15, and 16. And Isaiah is saying, the whole family here are for signs. They are used by God as signs. The second word, wonders, actually also means signs. But in this case, it is taken as like a miracle in Israel. It's for everyone. And so the interesting thing is, God actually uses people to show as signs. The other person that you could look at for an equivalent would be Hosea. Chapter 1 would be a good chapter to look at. And that would involve Hosea, the wife, and the children, and how God gave names to the children to bring out a lesson for the northern kingdom. And here God is teaching through Isaiah and his entire family. The first child, the second child, including the wife. And now he says, I am for signs from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. What is important for them is to look at God in his word and through the signs he has given through the prophet Isaiah and his children, and of course his wife. And then when they say to you, seek those who are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? Now this is important for us to realize that at a time where they are afraid, they look for all places for help, but not to God. They seek mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter. They are not real, but they are trying to show you ways and directions which doesn't come from God. Should not a people seek their God? Who is God? Jehovah Tzevaot. Why are they seeking the dead on behalf of the living? Why is someone who is alive looking at somebody who is dead and they think that the mediums are speaking on their behalf? Shouldn't they look for God? And that's the meaning. To the law, to the testimony. Remember just now? The Torah and the testimony, the things that is repeated. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no light in them. They are not seeing the truth. Verse 21. They pass through it hard-pressed and hungry, and it shall happen. When they are hungry, they will be enraged. They will curse their king and their God and look upward. And they will look to the earth and see trouble, darkness, gloom of anguish, driven into darkness. So basically, God is trying to tell them, they will pass through hard-pressed and hungry. All these are description of when the Assyrians come and put a siege around them. And when they are put a siege around them, you see, the days of warfare in the old days is that if you have a city, those who come to conquer, like the Assyrians, they would place a siege. They would sit around you and they would sit it through to wait for you to get hungry. Finish all your water, finish all your food, and by which time you'll be ready to give up. And so this is the picture that is being painted. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom will be hard-pressed and hungry, and it will happen when they are hungry. They will get angry. They will curse their king. They will curse God and look upward. They will look to the earth, and then they will see persecution and trouble around them, darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be driven into darkness. All these are imagery, right? Imagery of the siege. Now we come to the last verse of chapter 8. which is the first verse of chapter 9. It says this, nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed. This is speaking to Judah. To the northern kingdom of Israel, the gloom will be very gloomy indeed. And it says, when at first he lightly esteemed. The idea here is not quite the same. When at first, the idea here is when he caused it to be light, right? He caused it to be light. This means the king of Assyria treated Israel lightly. When? The first time. This first time would be in the 4th year of Ahaz. 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29. And so what happened in the first siege was that the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali were taken into exile. Now, afterward, this would be in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 4, that they will be more heavily oppressed. And this is treating the kingdom of Israel. What happened was that the king of Assyria was coming by the way of the sea, and this would be the Sea of Galilee, beyond the Jordan. Now, when you come beyond the Jordan, you will also find that this would be Reuben, and Gad. This beyond the Jordan, from Syria coming in through the Golan Heights, and then beyond the Jordan of Reuben and Gad by the way of the Sea of Galilee, in the Galilee of the peoples. This is how the Hebrew reads, right? The Galilee is also having a name, Galilee. This would be the turning door. Now, it's interesting that Galil, which is Galilee in the English, is the turning door. So you see that the king of Assyria, by the way of the Sea of Galilee, beyond the Jordan, in the turning door of the people. So we find that all the people coming into Israel and Judah will come in by the way of Galilee, in and out, in and out, in and out. And it will traverse to the northeast, to Damascus. That's where Syria is, and all the way up north to Ashur, which is the Assyrians. And so with this, we end chapter 8.